Hey, what's cyberpunking my Choomba stanks? We restored a borked little Morathi model by cyberpunking her last time. Now we're going to do the bigger version. But first, there are some problems. I think someone melted the wings somehow. The snake looks primer kind of that wouldn't come off. Probably from paint huge gaps all over the place. If I was worms, I'm feeling cheaty, so I print this big base topper without a plan, but I'm confident. I found some vat for some skeleton astronaut diorama, and it seemed like the perfect replacement for her marble column she normally slithers upon, and it ended up being pretty much perfect. By the way, when cutting up cured resin, please wear eye protection. It literally is probably the most embarrassing way that you could lose sight in an eye. Vallejo modeling putty works great as a gap filler given the long working time, and stinky cheap model airplane putty is also perfect for huge gaps that you'll need to sand. I printed off similar items to the little Morathi base to keep it all uniform, but ended up not using a lot of it because it's just a lot. Look at this garbage trying to fit together. I basically just used a bucket of plastic glue and clamped the pieces in place. There's gaps for days, the worst of which is the wings, which at a certain point I just carved up a bit and filled in all the holes with sandable putty. The snake monoleg, which I believe it's technically called, also had the same issues, but I found pushing putty in to the gaps with my little Vienna sausages did a good enough job of filling in the gaps without obscuring the detail on the higher points. Morathi is going to get an Apple VR headset because that just makes sense to me. Someone paid me to make this model, and drilling into her temples to make this visor fit gave me the panicky Pete's, but it all worked out in the end. While using this product from the bad company to make cables, please note how making them makes it look like there's a little rat stuck between the plates and is doing barrel rolls, and his little tail is just spinning like a cartoon character. Oh no, what are you doing? Alright, that's enough of that. I also 3D printed some sword arms so she'd look more like 90s girl boss icon Shiva for Mortal Kombat 2. If Shiva had swords and arms, like Jax, I guess. Painting time. To prime, I gave it the old Hawk Tour with Vallejo black, then natural gray, and then a bunch of lemon white added to that for the highest points. After airbrushing, I took a so barely damp you're not even positive there's any water on it because you dried it out with a paper towel makeup brush, and dry brush all of the tippy tops with a pure or slightly off white. The moisture will prevent the chalkiness, but if you do it too much, and you will initially, it'll streak all over the place. It just takes practice. Like the other Morathi, this one is going to be set up with lighting at the start, then re-established at the end. Hitting it from below with a blue from one angle, then mid-low with a purple, and finally straight on from one side with a pink, going all around the model. Some of this will be showing all the way at the end, some will be covered up right away. That'll all be decided moment to moment by what kind of looks right at the time. Time to start establishing metals. I picked something mid-hue off the shelf and got sketchy with it, adding that mid-tone to places that looked right, holding the bottle away from my face and trying to decide which neon colors look like they make sense to remain as a reflection or which should go. Alright, this is a great time to find a gap I missed. Killer time to fix it. Everyone is excited, everyone's loving this. Awesome. I could switch to the brush to start working on the green tail, but when the airbrush is out, it's hard to put it away. Do not, my friends, become addicted to the airbrush. It will take hold of you, and you will resent its absence. I paint the model in this video the way I usually paint models, which is bouncing all over the place to fight off attention issues. Lacking a desire to commit to anything, I start building up woody and scaly areas with brown inks and heavily watered down Iroko from scale 75. When I get to the wings, I use these same colors and the old orange bag trick to get some easy, veiny texture. some small areas to base here and there, and we're ready for the next Satan varnish to save our work. Everything is looking a bit too clean, so I grab the ketchup bottle and start greasing up the joint, using dark panel liner for the places I want extra dark. After a short wait, I use makeup sponges to clean off the high points, which, by the way, these softer, more expensive ones aren't as good. You're going to want the harder Dollar Tree specials, where it's like $1 for a whole bag. If you recall the enamel effects earlier, I took off the high points with a dry sponge, but it never gets 100% clean. For that, I wait about half an hour and then come back with a sponge with a little bit of thinner and just clean off the tippy top points or places that should be pristine. I didn't want to freehand a bunch of punk tattoos, so I bought some transfer printer paper like you'd use to make a mug or whatever, and printed off a bunch of things I found when I googled Cyberpunk tattoo vector 80s neon graffiti minus sign AI in quotations space minus sign ChatGPT in quotations, and started soaking them in microset and strategically applying them to the model so they all look cool, but like they were at one time a bad decision, just like most real tattoos. Microset gets painted where they're going to go, and then the decal is delicately layered on top of it. One thing I did dumbly is I used microsol. When I found some bubbles I had to pop so the decal would better conform to the more textured surfaces of the wing. Except apparently you can overdo this, and the decal gets very rigid and loses its plasticity, making everything even worse, which is exactly what I did. But now that you know that, you won't do it. But if you do it, don't worry, I fix it kind of mostly. Hang tight, I'll show you how. While things were drying, I took that time to start to do some recessed low lighting and Morathi's crown, the same way I did it on the other model. I used orange brown, Oroco all the way up to a lemon white highlight. The way I painted the crown last time was me awkwardly not liking the end result multiple times and constantly adding more things to the process to get where I wanted. And I was trying to think of the way to do it properly the first time, but then I just decided to do it the wrong way I did last time, which got me to the end result that I wanted, so I guess that was the right way. While fussing with the crown, I shifted back and forth between doing the steel-type metallics. There's so many different swords and blades, so I tried a new approach. Every time I used a new prominent color, I looked at all of the weapons and decided if that color should be reflecting in them. If so, I'd glaze that color into the blades, slowly bringing them to completion as the model went on. I actually kind of loved this approach, but you really need to have a good idea of where your highlights and lowlights and reflections are going to be in the end result. If I did this again, I'd definitely sketch those out first with just gray and white. The dress I wanted to be purple, but like I used multiple purple adjacent neon colors, so I spent a lot of time farting around with it trying to make it look like it's this independently purple fabric illuminated by different purple adjacent colors. And I think it, at the end of things, was adequate, but I think I would have just done red for the dress if I did this all over again. She's supposed to be a usurping blood and murder goddess, so I probably should have just done red to begin with, but you know, we live, we learn, we laugh, we love. I was also indecisive on the snake. I decided to start dry brushing up in some teal and building up to the slightest bit of yellow. I eventually add some more shadow contrast to the snake scales later on in this process, but I should have done more extreme highlights now while I was doing the dry brush to make it really pop at the end. The base is looking a bit washed out, so I start dabbing texture into the midtones of the metallics, adding some interest. I wanted the base to look rather lit up by the neon lighting, so it was interesting to know how far to push the base as to not undermine that effect. I keep picking at the base all the way to the end of the model for what it's worth. I'm never really completely happy with it until the very end. I wasn't enjoying how samey all of the metal was, so I picked some important metallics to push into an extreme blue. I've decided that this is because they're made out of plasteel, a combination of steel and plastic. If this is not a canonical Cyberpunk fabrication resource, I would like for the opportunity to submit it to the appropriate committee to have it added as such. Gritty models and gritty environments call out for oil paints. Fairly heavily thinned with artist's thinner allows us to cover up 90% of the bubbles previously created by the decals, and the rest I can manually touch up. It's oil, so I keep mixing as I go, adding blues for shadows or yellow for highlights. This kind of makes a couple acrylic washes. I did redundant though, but that was minimal work to be fair that got covered up. Once everything is fairly goopy, I come back an hour later and remove it from the model surface using the same method as before we used with enamels. From here on out, I'm just working on painting in all the little bits and bobs and things that I forgot. I don't know if this ever happens to you where you go tunnel blind on a model where there's entire areas that you haven't painted and you just completely forget about it. When you look at the model, like your brain doesn't read it as unpainted and you think that you're done. So you kind of hold the model away and you're like, wow, I did a good job. And then the whole talon or like the entire wing structure is unpainted. And you're like, oh, gee, I got to do that now. At this point, all that's left to do with the brush is some final washes and highlights on the wings, touch-ups on the bubbles from the decals that were quite bad. Really bad, actually. Like, listen, the oil wash helped, but you gotta try not to do it horribly the first time, ideally. It took an outrageous amount of time to fix all my little boo-boos. You can see the bubbles even now. Like, I just went back at the end and was like, all right, let's sort this out. But, you know, it won't be like that for you. Just put on decals like a adult the first time. You'll be fine. The yellow and black cables were coming out kind of messy, so I did what any self-respecting artist would do. I drowned it in ketchup to hide the bad brushwork. And it worked. It always works. Every time. Home stretch, scariest part of the model. I take the original neon highlight colors and reestablish sections previously covered, but only where it makes sense, and that is completely vibes based. I keep the paint as thin as possible so I can slowly work my way up and take time to look at the model and make sure I don't go too far. I also add the slightest bit of lemon yellow to each color for spots with greater illumination to really dial up the intensity. And then as a final step, I use a green to mint kind of color to highlight any glowing sections like computer screens or mechanical eyeballs. And with that, we're done.